The fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead, flickering every now and then as though even the old bulbs were tired of the long day. It was nearly 9 at night, and Wilson's corner market was almost empty. A lone cashier leaned against the counter, scrolling her phone, uninterested in the few customers who wandered in this late. Thomas Reynolds pushed open the glass door with the absent-minded ease of a man who had walked through 100 such doors without ever really noticing them. He didn't need anything from this store. Not really, but after another 14-hour workday filled with contracts, board meetings, and screens that glowed until his eyes burned, something inside him craved the small indulgence of sugar, something simple, ordinary, human. His polished shoes clicked softly against the linoleum floor as he walked past the aisles. He looked immaculate as always, tailored navy suit, pale gray tie loosened at the collar, hair still neatly combed despite the hours behind him. To the world, Thomas was the image of success, 30 years old, CEO of one of the fastest growing tech companies in New York, a man who turned everything he touched into profit. Yet as he reached for a packet of chocolate-covered almonds, he felt it again, that strange emptiness that lingered no matter how much he achieved, no matter how many accolades came his way. It was the same emptiness that had followed him home, to his penthouse overlooking Central Park, to rooms filled with leather furniture and glass walls, but no laughter. He checked his watch. 8:47 p.m. A quiet sigh escaped him. Then, just as he turned toward the register, he heard a small, hesitant voice behind him. "Excuse me, sir." He paused and looked down. A girl stood by his elbow, so tiny he almost hadn't noticed her. She couldn't have been older than 7. Her blonde hair was tied into a messy ponytail, strands escaping to frame a pale face smudged with the faint dirt of the streets. Her coat was clean, but frayed at the elbows, too thin for the chill outside. In her small hands, clutched tightly as if it were a treasure, was a carton of milk. Thomas blinked at her, taken off guard. "Yes," she swallowed, her chin lifting slightly in a gesture that seemed far too proud for her size. "Could I please have this milk? I can pay you tomorrow. I promise." The words struck him harder than they should have. For a moment, he simply stared, trying to understand. She wasn't begging. She wasn't whining or pleading the way children sometimes did when they wanted candy. Her voice carried weight, dignity, like a little soldier standing her ground. Thomas crouched a little, lowering himself to her level. "What's your name?" "Emily," she said, her knuckles wide around the carton. "Emily Wilson." "I'm Thomas." The name felt strangely heavy in his mouth. "Why do you need the milk so badly, Emily?" Her blue eyes met his without flinching. "For my brother. He's 4. He gets scared at night without milk." The way she spoke, measured, steady, too old for her years, tightened something in his chest. "You don't have to pay me back," Thomas said, pulling out his wallet. "I'll get it for you." Her eyes narrowed slightly, suspicion flickering. "There. Are you sure? My mom says we don't take handouts." "It's not a handout," he told her quietly. "It's just milk." The cashier rolled her eyes as Thomas handed over a crisp bill and took the carton to the scanner. The transaction was quick, unremarkable, yet Thomas felt as if he were crossing some invisible line. Emily took the bag with solemn grace, as though accepting a sacred gift. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. "Do you need a ride home? It's getting dark." She shook her head, already backing toward the door. "No, thank you. I'm not allowed to go with strangers, even nice ones." And with that, she slipped out into the night. Thomas stood there for a moment, watching her vanish into the shadows beyond the glass. Something about her words, her eyes, the stubborn pride in her small shoulders that lingered, pulling at him. He told himself to leave it alone. She wasn't his responsibility. Yet even as he walked toward the door, his feet betrayed him. Against every logical argument in his mind, Thomas Reynolds stepped into the night air and began to follow the little girl who had asked to pay tomorrow for milk. What he would find waiting for him in the darkness would change everything. The night air clung cold against Thomas's face. As he stepped out of the market, the automatic door signed shut behind him. For a moment, he almost turned back. He could still hear his rational self whispering, "What are you doing? Following a child through the streets of New York? Call social services. Go home. Forget this." But the other voice inside him, the quieter one he so often silenced, pressed harder. "Don't walk away." Not this time. Emily's small figure moved swiftly down the sidewalk, the carton of milk pressed to her chest as though it were a treasure she couldn't afford to lose. Her thin blue coat swayed with each determined step. She never once looked back, as though she was used to walking alone, as though the dark streets no longer frightened her. That detail unsettled Thomas more than anything. The idea of a child who had learned not to be afraid of shadows. He kept a cautious distance, his Italian leather shoes loud against the cracked pavement, completely out of place in this neighborhood, where street lamps flickered and graffiti spoke of lives lived in the margins. His penthouse with its marble counters and glass walls felt like another planet. Compared to this world, where a child could treat a gallon of milk as gold, Emily turned left, then right, her pace quickening as the streets grew darker. A rusted car sat abandoned on the curb, its windows smashed. A stray dog nosed through an overturned trash can. Thomas's chest tightened. He had grown up in a two-bedroom apartment, the son of a mother who worked 2 jobs and a father who left before his 10th birthday. But even in his poorest days, he had never known this level of decay, this kind of emptiness. His wealth, his empire, all of it seemed grotesque against the backdrop of this cracked sidewalk where a 7-year-old marched like a soldier on a mission. 15 minutes passed before she slowed. Ahead loomed an old apartment building, its windows boarded, its door hanging loose on a single hinge. Spray-painted words bled across the brick like scars. Emily glanced once over her shoulder, then darted inside. Thomas stopped dead. His stomach knotted. This place wasn't just poor, it was condemned. No lights in the windows, no sign of occupancy, but the faint flicker of something, maybe a candle, maybe a battery lamp deep inside. He felt the urge to call the police, but another part of him whispered that police meant questions, reports, the kind of attention that might rip children from their mother's arms. Cursing under his breath, he walked to the side, finding a broken window at ground level. He bent down, pressed his palm against the cold brick for balance, and peered through. Inside, the air looked thick with dust. The only light came from a small battery-powered lamp that buzzed weakly in the corner. And there she was, Emily, kneeling on a nest of threadbare blankets, carefully pouring milk into a chipped Batman cup. A boy sat cross-legged before her, 4, maybe 5 years old, tousled brown hair, bare feet despite the cold floor. His eyes lit up at the sight of the milk, as though she had handed him the world. "Here you go, Maddie," Emily said, her voice suddenly gentle, full of warmth Thomas hadn't heard at the store. "Drink it slow so it lasts longer." The boy grinned, gulping eagerly, a white mustache forming above his lip. "Is Mommy coming home today?" Emily's shoulders stiffened, her hands pausing. As she tucked the blanket tighter around him, she forced a smile that trembled at the edges. "Not today, buddy. She's still getting better at the hospital." Thomas felt his breath catch. The lie was obvious. He had seen that tone before in his mother's eyes, when she used to tell him his father was working late instead of gone for good. Emily was carrying a truth too heavy for her small shoulders. Maddie's voice broke the silence again. "But it's been forever." Emily smoothed his hair, her face twisting in a flicker of pain before she forced her smile again. "I know, but I'm here, right? And I'll take care of you." The boy nodded, sipping slower now, content with her promise. Thomas pressed his hand harder into the brick to steady himself. This wasn't what he expected. He had followed her out of curiosity, maybe guilt, but he hadn't expected this, a tiny guardian fighting the world with nothing but pride and scraps of strength. And then Emily's head turned suddenly toward the window. Her blue eyes, sharp and unblinking, met his. Thomas froze for a heartbeat. Neither moved. Then Emily's hand shifted protectively across her brother's small body. Her jaw tightened, and her chin lifted, just as it had at the store when she'd refused to take a hand out. The message in her glare was clear: stay away. Thomas's chest thudded. He knew if he walked away now, she would never forgive him for intruding. But if he stepped inside, he crossed a line he couldn't uncross. The rain began to patter softly against the boarded windows, as if the night itself were holding its breath, waiting to see which choice he would make. The rain tapped harder against the rotting boards, a steady rhythm that filled the silence. Thomas's breath fogged faintly on the cracked glass as he stood frozen. Emily's piercing blue eyes locked on his through the gap. For a child so small, her gaze carried a force that made his chest tighten. She didn't flinch, didn't panic. She simply shifted her body in front of her brother, her thin frame a human shield. Thomas had stared down executives, negotiated billion-dollar deals, and walked away with entire industries bending to his will. But now, under the weight of a child's suspicion, he felt powerless. Slowly, deliberately, he raised both hands. In the air, a silent gesture of peace. As though approaching a wild creature that might bolt at any sudden movement, Emily didn't relax. Her chin lifted, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Go away," she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear through the crack in the window. Her small hand stroked Maddie's hair protectively. "We don't need anything from you." The words pierced him more deeply than he expected. "We don't need anything from you." He thought of his boardroom, his penthouse, his hall of victories. Everyone in his world needed something from him: money, power, influence. Yet here, in this decaying tomb of a building, a child told him he had nothing of value. Thomas swallowed. "I'm not here to hurt you." His voice came out lower, softer than he intended. I wanted to make sure you were safe." Emily's eyes narrowed. "Safe? We're fine." Her tone was sharp, rehearsed, like a shield she'd used many times before. Thomas's gaze shifted briefly to Maddie. The boy's eyelids drooped as he clutched his Batman cup, milk smeared across his lip. He leaned into his sister's side, trusting her completely. The sight cut through Thomas like glass. He thought of his own childhood, of the nights he sat on a worn-out couch, waiting for a father who never returned, listening to his mother hum lullabies through her exhaustion. He had sworn never to feel that kind of helplessness again. Yet here it was, alive in the eyes of two children who had no one else, against reason. He moved to the door. The hinges groaned as he pushed it open. The damp air inside smelled of dust and rust, heavy with the forgotten weight of years. Emily stiffened instantly, her small shoulders squaring like a soldier preparing for battle. "Stop," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "Don't come closer." Thomas halted, raising his hands again. He crouched slightly, lowering himself to her level. "I just want to talk. That's all." Emily's jaw clenched. "You're a stranger. Strangers take. They don't give." The sentence hit him harder than any insult he'd ever endured. How many times had he been that stranger swooping into markets, buying out competitors, tearing things apart for profit? In her world, people like him were the enemy. "I don't want to take anything," Thomas said, his voice cracking despite himself. "You've already shown me more strength than I've seen in most grown men." Emily blinked at him, her suspicion faltering just slightly. He seized the opening, lowering himself until he was sitting on the cold floor, his expensive suit dampening against the cracked tiles. "See, I'm not here to scare you. I can't walk away." Emily, her hand tightened on her brother's shoulder. Maddie stirred, looking up with half-closed eyes. "Emmy, who's that man?" Emily's throat bobbed as she swallowed. "Nobody," she said quickly. "Just somebody who's leaving now." Her words were daggers, but Thomas didn't move. The rain hammered harder, water dripping from the ceiling in thin lines. His polished world felt 1,000 miles away. Here, everything was stripped bare. A child who lied to protect her brother, another too young to understand, and a man who realized he couldn't return to his empty penthouse without doing something. Then Thomas noticed something that made his pulse quicken. In the corner, beneath a torn blanket, was a worn hospital bracelet. His eyes caught the faint writing. "Wilson, Clara." His breath hitched. Clara, a name from his past, sharp as a blade. Memories flashed her laughter in a college library. The way she had once looked at him as though he mattered beyond ambition. He blinked it away. But the truth sat heavy. Emily's last name wasn't just a coincidence. His gaze flicked back to Emily, who was staring at him now with wide, wary eyes. She had seen him notice the bracelet for the first time. Thomas realized this wasn't just about two children surviving in the dark. This was a thread tying straight into his own past, a past he had thought buried beneath wealth and success. The storm outside howled, wind rattling the broken boards. Inside, silence pressed against them like a living thing. Thomas sat frozen, caught between the urge to flee and the pull of something deeper, something that whispered that walking away would mean losing more than he could ever imagine. Emily's voice finally broke the silence, quiet but laced with iron. "Why are you really here?" Thomas opened his mouth to answer, but no words came. The storm outside had grown restless, the rain hammering the boarded windows until the whole building seemed to tremble with it. Thomas sat on the damp, cracked floor, the sharp chill of the concrete seeping into his bones. But he didn't move. Across from him, Emily's thin frame blocked her brother like a wall of flesh and willpower. Her blue eyes fierce even in the weak glow of the battery lamp. "You shouldn't be here." she said again, her voice firmer now, though it trembled. At the edges, Thomas tried to speak, but his throat felt dry. Why was he here? He should have walked away at the store, let her take the milk and vanish into the night. He should have gone back to his car, back to his penthouse, back to the illusion of control. But he hadn't. He'd followed her into the shadows like a man compelled. I wanted to make sure you got home safe. He finally managed Emily's laugh was short, sharp, humorless. Home, this isn't home. You don't understand. Her words cut deeper than she knew. Thomas shifted, lowering his voice. Then help me understand. She narrowed her eyes. Why would I trust you? The question hung heavy between them, the storm punctuating it with thunder. Thomas hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket, slowly, deliberately. He pulled out his phone and slid it across the floor toward her. You don't have to. Trust me. But if I meant harm, I wouldn't have left this with you. Call whoever you want. Emily's eyes flicked to the sleek phone, then back to him. Her hand didn't move. People like you always want something. Nobody gives without taking. The words made him flinch. He thought of the countless deals he had struck, the contracts signed, the way he had climbed by outsmarting and outlasting everyone. She was right. In his world, nothing came without a price. But here, looking at her, he realized something uncomfortable. For the first time in years, he wanted to give without taking. I don't want anything, Thomas said quietly. Not from you, not from your brother. He stopped, his voice thickening. I just can't walk away. Emily's face shifted, uncertainty flickering there. For a moment, she seemed younger, more like the child she was. But then her jaw set again, the steel returning. You saw the bracelet, didn't you? She asked suddenly. The question hit him like a punch. His chest tightened. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I saw you look at it, she pressed, her voice sharp now, trembling not with fear, but with anger. Don't pretend you didn't. You know her name. Everyone who tries to help us knows her name. Then they disappear. Thomas's hands curled into fists against the floor. Clara, he whispered before he could stop himself. Emily's breath caught. Her eyes widened. How do you know my mom's name? Thomas's pulse roared in his ears. He forced himself to breathe. We knew each other a long time ago. Emily's suspicion sharpened instantly. You're lying. I'm not. He tried to steady his voice. We went to school together. His words faltered as memories he had buried long ago surged forward. Clara's laughter in the college library, the way her hand had fit in his, the arguments about ambition and love, the slow unraveling that had pulled them apart. He had told himself she belonged to the past, and yet, here her name was, glowing faintly on a hospital bracelet in a crumbling building. Emily's voice sliced through the memory. If you really knew her, where is she? Why isn't she here? Thomas's heart twisted. He had no answer. Maddie stirred in his sleep, shifting against his sister's side. Emily smoothed his hair with trembling hands, her eyes never leaving Thomas. She's sick, she whispered finally, almost to herself. They said she'd get better, but it's been weeks, and if she doesn't, her voice broke. She clutched her brother tighter, her little body shaking as she tried to hide the tears brimming in her eyes. Thomas's throat ached. He wanted to reach out, to bridge the distance between them. But the invisible wall she had built around herself and her brother was iron. I can help, he said softly. Let me help her. Let me help you. Emily shook her head violently, wiping at her eyes with her sleeve. No, you'll just leave, like everyone else. Her words sank into him like leave. Yes, that's what he had always done. Left Clara when she wanted more than ambition. Left his own past buried under glass towers and stock prices. Left his heart behind in the name of progress. The storm outside boomed again, shaking the walls. Inside, the silence between them thickened, charged with something unspoken. Emily leaned closer to her brother, whispering something into his ear even though he was already asleep. Her lips brushed his hair. Then she looked back at Thomas, her face pale, but determined. You want to help, she said finally, her voice low and fierce. Then prove it. Stay. Just stay. Thomas's breath caught. It wasn't money she wanted. Not food. Not clothes. Not a ride. Just presence. Something he hadn't given anyone in years. As the rain pounded harder, Thomas realized he was standing at a precipice. For once, there was no contract to sign, no deal to close. Just a choice to leave and pretend this night never happened. or to stay and face everything he had buried, including the ghost of Clara. The answer pressed heavy in his chest, shaking the foundation of everything he thought he was, and as he looked at Emily's unyielding eyes, he knew walking away was no longer possible. As the storm raged on, its roar muffled by the boarded windows. But inside the abandoned building the silence was thicker than the rain. Thomas remained where he sat, his expensive suit dampened and stained by the cracked floor, his hands resting uselessly on his knees. He felt stripped of the armor he wore in boardrooms, the invisible shell of power that had always protected him. In this place, none of it mattered. Money, prestige, influence, they were as useless here as the broken elevator at the far end of the hall. Emily hadn't moved either. She sat upright, her back stiff against the wall, Maddie curled against her chest. The flickering lamp cast shifting shadows across her face, making her look at once like a child and an old soul who had seen too much. She kept watching Thomas with unblinking suspicion, as though expecting him to vanish at any second. "You should go," she whispered finally, her voice so low it nearly drowned under the rain. "People like you don't stay." Thomas swallowed hard. "That maybe I'm not like other people." Her lips pressed into a line, unconvinced. "Everybody says that." He almost laughed at the bitter truth in her words. How many times had he told people what they wanted to hear? How many times had he used charm, promises, contracts to get his way? But this was different. Here, no words could save him. Only action. "I'll stay," Thomas said quietly, "if that's what you want." Emily tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "Why?" He hesitated, because he couldn't bear the thought of leaving her here. Because the sight of Maddie sipping milk from a chipped Batman cup had broken something inside him. Because the name Clara on that bracelet still echoed in his chest. Because no child should have to go through this alone. Emily studied him for a long moment, as though searching for cracks in his sincerity. Then, slowly, she pulled an old blanket from the pile and tossed it toward him. It smelled of dust and mildew, but Thomas caught it as though it were a gift. "Fine," she said softly, "but if you try anything, I'll scream." Thomas almost smiled at the fierceness in her voice. "Fair enough." He spread the blanket across the floor beside them, lowering himself down. The cold crept into his body immediately, the hardness of the concrete foreign to a man accustomed to Egyptian cotton sheets and climate-controlled comfort. Yet, strangely, he didn't resent it. For the first time in years, he felt something, like honesty. Maddie stirred in his sleep, murmuring, "Is Mommy home?" Before settling again, Emily kissed his forehead, her thin arms tightening around him protectively. Thomas turned his face away, giving her the dignity of privacy, but inside, his chest ached. As the hours passed, the silence between them began to change. It wasn't comfortable, not yet, but it wasn't hostile either. At one point, Thomas asked gently, "How long has it been since your mom went into the hospital?" Emily's small hand smoothed her brother's hair. 3 weeks. She collapsed at work. They said it was her heart. Her voice cracked for the first time. "They wouldn't let me stay with her, said I was too young, so I came back here. Someone has to take care of Maddie." Thomas's throat tightened. "And no one else? No family?" Her eyes flickered with pain. "No one who cares." The rain pounded harder, as though underscoring her words. Thomas clenched his jaw, fighting the urge to ask the question clawing at him. Was Clara truly her mother? Was this really the same woman he had once loved? He couldn't force it now, not when Emily's wall still stood so high. Instead, he asked, "Why here? Why this place?" Emily's gaze shifted to the shadows above them. "It used to be ours, before they closed it down, before they said it wasn't safe. But it's the only place I know. It still smells like her." Her words carried such raw weight that Thomas felt breathless. He looked around at the peeling paint, the cracked ceiling, the puddles forming from leaked sand. Yet, to Emily, this was more than ruins. It was memory, belonging, fragments of a world she refused to abandon. The night stretched on. At one point, Thomas dozed lightly, only to wake when a sudden crash of thunder rattled the boards. He opened his eyes to find Emily still awake, her gaze fixed on him. "You're really still here," she whispered. "I said I would be." Her face softened, just for a moment. Then she tucked her chin into her brother's hair, her eyes fluttering shut. Thomas watched her as she finally drifted into sleep, her small hand still gripping Maddie's as though she could anchor him in this storm of a life. Thomas leaned back against the wall, staring at the shadows dancing across the ceiling. He thought of Clara, of how she had once begged him to slow down, to choose life over ambition. He had walked away then, but fate had brought him here tonight, to her children, to the life he had abandoned without ever knowing it existed. The storm began to ease just before dawn, the rain softening into a steady drizzle. Thomas hadn't closed his eyes once. His mind spun, filled with questions he couldn't yet ask, choices he wasn't sure he could make. But one thing was certain. He was no longer the same man who had walked into Wilson's market craving sugar. Something had shifted. The walls he had built for years were beginning to crack, brick by brick, and as the gray light of morning crept through the broken boards, Thomas knew this was only the beginning. Because soon he would have to face Clara, and the truth waiting for him that would either destroy him or give him something he never thought he deserved. Morning crept slowly into the cracks of the boarded windows, a gray light that washed the broken room in shades of pale. The storm had quieted, leaving behind the steady drip of water from a leak in the ceiling. Thomas sat awake against the wall, his blanket damp and heavy, but his mind sharper than it had been in years. He hadn't closed his eyes once. His world, the polished offices, the cars, the penthouse, all of it seemed like a dream he no longer trusted. What felt real was here. Two children asleep against each other, fighting for scraps of dignity in a condemned building. Emily stirred first. She blinked against the weak morning light, disoriented for a moment before her body tensed. Her blue eyes darted toward Thomas, still sitting there. For a second, her breath caught, maybe expecting him to be gone. "You're still here," she whispered. "I told you I'd stay." His voice was soft, almost rough from the long silence of the night. Emily studied him as though waiting for the trick, the hidden cost. But when she found none, her shoulders dropped ever so slightly. She shifted, careful not to wake Maddie, and asked, "Why?" Thomas opened his mouth, but the answer tangled in his throat. "Because your mother's name is written on that bracelet. Because she's the woman I walked away from. Because you might be mine." But he couldn't say it yet. "Not like this. Because you shouldn't be here," he said instead. "Neither of you." Emily's lips tightened. "We don't have anywhere else." "Yes, you do." His tone carried more weight now. "Your mother's in the hospital. That's where you should be with her." Emily flinched, glancing down at her sleeping brother. "They said I couldn't stay. They said kids weren't allowed, and I couldn't take Maddie with me, so we came back here." Her voice cracked. She tried to cover it with steel, but Thomas heard it. The raw fear underneath. Thomas leaned forward, his eyes steady. "Then let me take you, both of you. We'll go to the hospital together." Emily's body stiffened instantly, her guard snapping back into place. "No, Emily, no." Her voice echoed in the hollow space, startling Maddie awake. He rubbed his eyes, clinging to her arm. Emily held him close, her gaze fierce. "On Thomas, you think you can just walk in here and fix everything. That's not how it works. People promise things all the time. They say they'll help, and then they leave. They always leave." The words landed heavy. Thomas looked away, shame crawling up his spine. He had been one of those people once, someone who left Clara when she asked him for more than ambition, someone who believed success would fill the emptiness, only to discover it made the silence louder. "I'm not leaving," he said, his voice low but certain. Emily's lip trembled. She wanted to believe him, he could see it, but believing cost too much. Before Thomas could press further, Maddie tugged at his sister's sleeve. "Emmy, can we go see Mommy today? Please, I miss her." His small voice was thick with sleep, but his words pierced the air like a plea. Emily closed her eyes. Her hands shook as she brushed the hair from her brother's forehead. When she opened them again, they glistened. "Fine," she whispered, her chin lifted toward Thomas, though her body trembled. "But if you hurt us, if you lie, I'll never forgive you." Thomas nodded, his chest tight. "I don't blame you." They left the building together, Thomas carrying Maddie while Emily clutched the milk carton against her chest, as though it were still the most valuable thing in the world. The city was waking, commuters rushing past without a glance. No one noticed the billionaire in his wrinkled suit, carrying a little boy and walking beside a girl who looked far too old for her years. The hospital loomed ahead after a long, tense cab ride. Emily's hand never left Maddie's shoulder, her eyes flicking constantly to Thomas as though expecting him to vanish before the doors. But he didn't. He stayed. Inside, the antiseptic air was thick, the hum of machines filling the halls. Emily led the way with surprising confidence, weaving through the corridors until she stopped outside a room. Her small body froze in the doorway. Thomas stepped up behind her and looked inside. The sight stole the air from his lungs. Clara lay on the bed, pale and fragile, tubes winding from her body to humming machines. Her once vibrant face was shadowed, her chest rising and falling only with the help of the machines. Time had not been kind, and yet, even in this fragile shell, Thomas saw her, the woman who had once laughed beside him, who had once begged him to choose life over work. Emily squeezed her brother's hand and whispered, "See, Maddie, Mommy's still here." Her voice wavered, but she forced a smile. Thomas gripped the doorframe, his knees threatening to buckle. On the nightstand, just as he feared, sat a faded photograph in a cheap frame. He didn't need to pick it up to know what it showed: him and Clara, young and smiling, taken during the brief years when they believed love was enough. Emily turned suddenly, her eyes sharp. "Why are you looking at her like that?" Thomas's lips parted, his voice shaking. "Because I knew her." The truth clawed at his chest, desperate to be spoken. His heart pounded, the world narrowing to Emily's suspicious glare and the fragile rise and fall of Clara's chest. What he said next would shatter everything. Thomas stood rooted to the spot, the antiseptic tang of the hospital clawing at his senses. The rhythmic beep of machines loud in the silence. His world, the boardrooms, the billion-dollar deals, the penthouse tower seemed to collapse inward, until there was only this room, this fragile woman on the bed, and two children clinging to her like the last fragments of home. Emily's eyes were locked on him, fierce and demanding, her small jaw clenched. Maddie leaned into her side, thumb in his mouth, his wide eyes watching Thomas with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. "Why are you looking at her like that?" Emily repeated, her voice sharp. Thomas's throat worked, but no words came. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. Memory surged, Clara's laughter echoing across the college campus, her fierce eyes during late-night arguments about ambition, the day she walked away when he chose empire over love. He had buried those memories under years of relentless work, and now, here she was, half-broken but alive, and beside her stood two children who carried the weight of her absence like scars. "I knew her," he whispered. The words tasted like confession. Emily's eyes narrowed. "Knew her how?" Thomas swallowed hard. He wanted to say it gently, carefully, but the truth burned through his restraint. She wasn't just someone I knew. Clara and I," his voice faltered. "We loved each other. Years ago." Emily blinked, her lips parting slightly, but suspicion quickly hardened her face again. "That doesn't mean anything. Lots of people loved her. Lots of people left her." Her words stabbed. Thomas took a step closer, but Emily moved instantly, putting herself between him and her mother's bed, just as she had shielded Maddie in the abandoned building. Her defiance made his chest ache. "I didn't know," Thomas said, his voice raw. "I didn't know about you, about him." His gaze flicked to Maddie, then back to Emily. "If I had," Emily cut him off, her voice trembling with anger. "If you had, what? You would have stayed. You would have helped. You don't know us. You weren't there when she collapsed. You weren't there when I had to lie to him every night so he wouldn't cry himself to sleep. You weren't there." Her words poured like fire, each one scorching him with the weight of years he could never undo. Thomas's vision blurred, not from exhaustion, but from the shame pressing against him. Maddie tugged on Emily's sleeve, his small voice breaking the tension. "Emmy, is he our dad?" The room froze. The question hung in the air, fragile and terrifying. Emily's eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. She crouched quickly, clutching her brother's cheeks. "Don't say that. Don't ever say that." Her voice cracked as she forced a shaky smile. He's just someone who bought us milk, remember?" But Maddie's gaze drifted back to Thomas, innocent and searching. Thomas's knees weakened. His chest felt like it might split open. He took a breath that rattled through him and forced himself to meet Emily's gaze. "Yes," he said hoarsely. Emily flinched as it struck. Thomas pressed on, the truth unstoppable now. I think I am. I didn't know. Clara never told me, but I could see it in you, in him. Your eyes, your strength. It's her, and maybe me too." Emily's face twisted, torn between fury and disbelief. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. "No," she whispered, "no. You don't get to just show up now and say that. You don't get to walk in and call yourself our father. Thomas nodded, his vision blurring. You're right. I don't deserve that. I don't deserve you. But I'm not leaving this time. Not again. The machines beeped steadily. Clara's fragile body breathing with their help. Emily's small shoulders shook as she held Maddie tighter. Silence filled the room until the only sound was Clara's heart monitor. Then, with a sudden tremor, Clara's fingers twitched. Thomas froze. Emily gasped and leaned forward, clutching her mother's hand. Mommy. Clara's eyelids fluttered, her lips parting ever so slightly. Her gaze, heavy with exhaustion but still alive, moved across the room. First to Emily, then to Maddie, and finally to Thomas. Recognition flickered in her eyes. A faint spark of memory, and tears slid down her cheeks. Thomas, she whispered. It was barely audible, but it shattered him. His chest caved, his legs buckled, and he sank into the chair beside her bed, his hand trembling as it reached for hers. Emily's grip tightened on her brother, her eyes darting between her mother and the man she didn't want to believe in. Thomas pressed his forehead to the back of Clara's fragile hand, his body shaking with the grief and love he had locked away for years. He had followed a little girl into the night, thinking he was chasing curiosity. Instead, he had walked straight into the truth he never expected, that the children he had bought milk for, the ones who clung to pride and survival, were his own. And for the first time in decades, the cold millionaire sat pale, speechless, stripped of power, wealth, and excuses, only a father, finally seeing what he had almost lost forever.